The events kick off somewhere, with a guy driving a carriage. All of a sudden, a bunch of huge monsters called goblins pop up, chasing him down and trying to grab him. The guy screams for help, and then some warriors show up to take care of the goblins. Their leader says that if you see one goblin, there are 100 more where it came from, and he tells his buddies to wipe them all out. A big fight breaks out against the goblins, with the warriors slicing off their heads with swords. Then, one massive warrior swings an axe and chops a goblin's head clean off, while the others finish off the rest. The scene changes to Veit, who's guarding the kingdom's gate and complaining about being hungry. The warriors walk past, and the huge warrior mentions he finally hit level 6 after chasing goblins all day. His friends decide to cash in the reward and split it. Veit overhears them and figures they're goblin hunters, saying he'll never be one of them. He puts his hand on his stomach, bummed out because it won't stop growling. He reminds himself that he's suffering because of his skill called gluttony, so he should be grateful he even has a job. Suddenly, the Valeric siblings, a trio, show up, and the townspeople clear the way for them since they're sacred guardians. Something falls out of a citizen's hand and bumps into Hato's shoe, one of the siblings. The citizen apologizes, but Hato chews him out, calling him scum, and then kicks him away. Hato's sister, Memel, jumps in, threatening the citizen, saying he should know what happens if he insults sacred knights, saying his neck will be cut. At that point, the third brother, Rafal, steps in to settle things, telling Hato and Memel to knock it off. They have to listen to Rafal, so they tell the citizen he got lucky. The warriors watching from a distance are shocked at how bad the situation is, and they can't believe that Lady Roxy is a sacred knight like those three. The siblings reach Veit, and Rafal asks if he's been doing a good job guarding the gate for them. When Veit says yes, Rafal tosses some coins on the ground and tells Veit to pick them up. Veit tries to grab the coins, but Hato steps on his hand, sarcastically saying he didn't see it. Rafal says Veit is pathetic, since his stomach is so loud it sounds like they don't even feed him. Then Hato kicks him in the stomach, asking if he's trying to embarrass the Valeric family. Hato hits him again, calling him scum, while Memel asks him who's paying him, saying someone useless like him wouldn't be earning any money without them, so he should be grateful to the sacred knights. Hato starts yelling at him to get up, but Veit can't because he's really hurt. Rafal says Veit needs a tough lesson. Right then, Roxy shows up and stops the siblings, saying that beating up citizens they swore to protect isn't what a sacred knight should be doing. She reminds them that guarding the gate is a sacred duty. Rafal replies that giving work to the poor is a duty too. Roxy looks at Hato's foot on Veit's face and asks if that's really necessary. Rafal makes a casual excuse and takes Hato and Memel away. Roxy quickly runs to Veit, offers him a hand to help him up, and asks if he's okay. Then she puts a cloth on his face, telling him not to move because he's bleeding. Veit thanks her, and she tells him they're partners when it comes to guarding the gate, adding that a sacred knight should act like this. Roxy reaches out her hand to Veit, saying it's time for her shift to start, and Veit hands her the flag. Roxy asks him to tell her if the trio bullies him again. He assures her that he's used to it, and then leaves for the tavern. There, Veit started hearing Roxy's words echoing in his mind, telling himself that he couldn't imagine what Rafal would do to him if he snitched to Roxy. The waiter interrupted him, asking if he had been hit again, confirming that if things continued like this, he would end up like the previous guy, because those three behaved violently and cruelly, and there's only one result for that, which is not good. But Veit didn't say anything. He paid his money, thanked the waiter, and left quietly. On his way home, he wished he had been born with a different skill than gluttony, saying that when a person has nothing, they'll always be a loser. Meanwhile, Veit noticed some thieves near the gate, so he quickly ran to tell Roxy. She decided to arrest the thieves immediately and asked him to take over guarding the gate instead. Veit took the guard's banner from her and wished her good luck, but suddenly saw a thief running towards him. He thought to himself that if he ran away, it would cause problems for Roxy since she had entrusted him with guarding the gate. So, he charged at the thief with his spear and stabbed it into his chest. The thief fell to the ground, bleeding, while Veit's greed skill activated, adding the skills of recognition and telepathy to him. Roxy soon arrived and worriedly asked if he was okay. Veit froze because he could hear Roxy's inner voice. Nevertheless, he told her he was fine, and she informed him that she needed to report what happened to her superiors. But Veit was distracted since he couldn't hear her inner voice again, so Roxy called out to him with concern. He replied that she could attribute all this to him, reminding her that he had taken down one of the thieves and asked if she was afraid that Mr. Rafal would find out. She also admitted that she would have failed her duty without him, and then insisted that she needed to show him her gratitude, offering him a job with the Hart family, wondering if he intended to serve the Fleury family until he was killed. Before Veit could respond, Roxy told him that his future was in his hands now. Veit began comparing his work with the Fleury family to working with the Hart family, telling himself that his future would be bright working with Mrs. Roxy, but he wondered who would fill his place with the Fleury family. Roxy told him that guarding the gate was the duty of all holy knights. Veit accepted the job with the Hart family, saying he would be pleased to do so. Afterward, Veit returned home and started wondering about the recognition and telepathy skills, remembering hearing Roxy's inner voice. He then realized that the skill was indeed telepathy. Still, Veit curiously questioned what was happening to his body, affirming that these skills might enable him to defeat monsters easily. The next day, Vite went to buy a sword. The seller asked him about his budget, and Vite opened his hand to show him the money he had. The seller scoffed, telling him he was wasting his hospitality on a poor person, stating firmly that he couldn't buy a weapon with such a small amount. Vite thought to himself that since he arrived in the royal capital 5 years ago, he had only managed to save these 2 silver coins from working. The seller pointed to a barrel of weapons, mentioning to Vite that he could only buy a weapon from the few in the barrel. Vite said that was better than nothing and started examining the swords, using his recognition skill to test their strength until he found one. He liked a dirty black sword treated like trash. Vite realized that sword resembled him perfectly, but he stepped back in panic when the sword called him boy, confessing that he was greedy and could be wielded with one hand. Then, it promised him he would be worthy of its service if he bought it, calling him the greedy one. Vite asked how it knew that about him, and the sword replied that they had many shared traits. Meanwhile, Mamil was conveying the news of Vite's employment at the Hart household to Rafal, suggesting that Roxy should be taught a lesson for challenging their family and trying to employ Vite without consulting them. Rafal, indifferent, replied that many could take Vite's place, and it wasn't worth the trouble. Mamil reminded him that Roxy complained about how they carried out the guarding duty. Rafal told her that the Hart and Fleury families were part of the 5 great families that supported the kingdom, so there was no point in complicating things between them. Rafal then got up, saying it was time to head to the military district. Mamil asked him what kind of studies he was conducting there that made him so excited. Rafal replied that those studies were to discover the path to immortality. Somewhere, Vite walked with his sword, which informed him it had learned its name. Suddenly, the sword alerted Vite, warning him of danger. He immediately turned and knocked down one of the goblins. At that moment, Vite's greed skill activated, adding the strength enhancement skill to him, and many more goblins appeared. Vite thought they were right when they said seeing one goblin meant 100 were close behind. He charged at the goblins with his sword, swinging it left and right until he took out all the goblins. Vite then noticed his stomach hadn't growled at all that day. The sword then told him he should thank the greed skill, as usually his stats would increase through fighting, and his level would rise based on experience, but the greed skill steals stats and skills without benefiting from experience, so he was still at level 1. Vite asked the sword how it knew all this, and the sword told him they were similar in that way, confirming that the greed skill worked against the holy law. Then it suggested he collect the goblin heads for his reward. After some time, Vite looked at his reward, saying that 38 goblin ears earned him 3 silver coins and 8 bronze coins, enough to order meat for dinner. But the sword stopped him, saying he needed to maintain it first, stressing that he didn't get the title greedy for nothing. Suddenly, while Vite was walking, he bumped into a man who was treating a girl violently while she cried for help. Vite decided to help her and ran after the man, who was abusing the girl somewhere, telling her she would become a toy for the holy knights. In the orphanage, the saint was explaining to a group of children that their world was created by Saint Lablas, who gave them the skills to thrive. She told them these skills were blessings from the gods, and they should be thankful for them. Then, she asked the children to have their meal, but she noticed one child wasn't eating. So, the saint asked him if he felt tired. The child grumbled that Saint Lablas was unfair because the holy knights and warriors had amazing skills, unlike him, who had a weak ability. The saint reminded him that in the past, there were no skills, stats, or even monsters, and everyone was equal. Hearing this, the child wished he had been born in those times and broke down in tears. The saint comforted him while another nun entered, saying she had searched everywhere for Sahara but would look around the town as well. Meanwhile, the kidnapper was holding the little girl somewhere, tormenting her as she cried in despair. Suddenly, the kidnapper vanished, and Vite appeared to the girl, assuring her she would be okay. He extended his hand and told her this was their chance to escape. However, the kidnapper's voice interrupted, saying he encountered fools like Vite every day who barged in out of curiosity. Vite unsheathed his sword, only to be mocked by the kidnapper, who asked how he could fight while protecting the girl. The child hid behind Vite, who told himself his priority was keeping her safe. Just then, his sword urged him to step back a bit because his opponent thought he was stronger and would exploit that confidence at the right moment. Vite grabbed the girl and retreated. The kidnapper then drew his weapon, ready to chase after Vite, threatening that if he killed him in front of the girl, she'd become completely obedient afterward. Here, Vite's sword commanded him to attack now. Vite knocked over the crates he was hiding behind and rushed towards the kidnapper. He leaped high and suddenly struck down on the kidnapper, shattering his weapon. The kidnapper fell to the ground in fear, and Vite asked him who had ordered him to kidnap the girl. The kidnapper replied he would never talk, so Vite plunged his sword into the kidnapper's chest. The kidnapper revealed that it was Hado who had requested this. Vite's eyes widened in shock, and then he gently took the girl with him. On the way, he asked her name, and she replied, Sahara. Vite introduced himself too and offered her food. He bought her some meat and warned her to be careful as it was hot. When she took a bite, Sahara told him she had never eaten meat before and thought it was really delicious. Vite moved his share closer to her and told her she could eat his portion too. After that, Sahara returned to the orphanage, where the saint was searching for her. When Sahara saw her, she hugged her under Vite's watchful gaze. Sahara thanked him for everything he did for her, which surprised Vite as no one had ever thanked him before, considering he had a terrible skill. Sahara asked if his skill was weak too, to which Vite replied that he was always hungry. Then Vite approached approached Sahara and told her that no matter how tough things got, if she could laugh in the face of her skill, she would surely find happiness. This reminded Vit of when his father first told him that, saying he hadn't understood what it meant back then. After that, Sahara said goodbye and left. Vit's sword then told him that it seemed like he had now gained the skill to wield a sword with one hand. Vit asked if that was good, and the sword confirmed, saying that gaining such a technical skill would also come with secret techniques and arts, allowing him to attack twice in one strike. Then, Vit remembered when the sword talked about something called the sharp edge during the kidnapper's attack. He scolded the sword for not warning him enough during the attack, saying he almost lost his life if he had been hit by the kidnapper. The sword replied that no one can interrupt a hero while saving a child. Vit told the sword he wasn't a hero, insisting that luck sometimes plays a role in winning battles, and it's not guaranteed that the hero always wins. At that moment, the sword asked if he planned to go to his first day at the Hart family looking like that tomorrow, causing Vit to drop the sword while shouting that he forgot to buy new clothes. In the old tavern, the aged Ad shared with the bartender the news about Mr. Mason's fall at the hands of a sacred dragon, saying it was confirmed by a warrior friend. The bartender asked what would happen to the Hart family then. Ad replied that Mrs. Roxy would take charge after Mr. Mason, but he wasn't sure how well she could handle the sacred knights. The bartender asked if he meant the Valeric brothers, and then he served Ad his drink, adding that he liked to talk only about happy things. Ad inquired about Vit, and the bartender replied that he used to come to the tavern every day after work. The next day, Vit went to the Sacred Knights district, specifically to the Hart Manor, where Roxy welcomed him, saying she had been waiting for him. But Vit seemed really distracted, so Roxy asked what was up. He said he was speechless because she looked so beautiful. Roxy shyly said she dressed up sometimes and that he looked nice too. Then, Roxy took him to her father's grave, saying Vit would be working with them from today on. Vit asked who was in the grave, and Roxy said it was her father, who died 5 days ago after running into a sacred dragon in Gallia. Vit was shocked because Gallia was a continent crawling with monsters, and it was the Sacred Knight's job to fight them. Roxy mentioned that this year's duty fell to the Hart family because a sacred dragon that hadn't left its lair in over 1,000 years had shown up and killed all her father's men. Vit apologized to Roxy for not knowing what she was going through. Roxy told him not to be sad, and revealed that she was now head of the Hart family, and from now on they'd work together to bring joy to the manor. She held out her hand to shake his, but he stopped himself so his telepathic skill wouldn't activate. Luckily for him, the maid Harrow showed up then and saved him. Roxy introduced Harrow to him and vice versa. Harrow welcomed him and said she was the head of the servants at the manor, and asked him to act like he was part of the Hart family. After that, Vit ate with the servants. Days went by, and Vit was trimming trees. Mr. Oliver told him to take a break after he finished, while Minerva commented that he seemed weird. She said he'd started a week ago, but she'd seen him talking to his sword all the time. Oliver added that he'd also seen him shaking while eating meat. Vit asked them to cut him some slack, since he hadn't eaten meat in 5 years. The two men laughed, saying they'd just had lunch, and asked if he'd eaten. Suddenly, Harrow came to him, saying Mrs. Roxy wanted to see him. Vit ran after her to meet Roxy, but was surprised because his stomach was growling for food even though he'd just eaten. He met Roxy, who called him Phi. After a long pause, he told her that his father used to call him that too, but he lost him during a monster hunting mission. He then asked why she called him Phi. Roxy explained that it was a good nickname for him, and added that he had become part of the Hart family now. Vit was shocked and told her it would be better if she called him by his full name. Suddenly, he stood up defensively and fainted. Later, Vit woke up in his room to find a note from Roxy telling him to rest and take the next day off. Then, he asked his greedy sword why he felt so awful. The greedy sword explained that the gluttony skill doesn't stop once it tastes the essence of souls, meaning he would be forced to hunt souls to eat them until he dies. Ignoring that would leave him starving to death or losing control and attacking anyone in his way. Vit thought this was impossible because he didn't want to be a monster. The greedy sword told him that when his hunger was at its worst, it would show in his eyes. Vit looked at himself in the mirror and confirmed it. The greedy sword insisted there was no turning back now, and urged him to go out and hunt monsters to make some cash. On the way, Vit asked if his red eye color was because he was hungry. The greedy sword confirmed it, adding that the color would help him see better at night and would scare prey, freezing them in place. Vit got to a goblin area and killed a bunch of them, but he wasn't satisfied, so he went to the hobgoblin forest, drawing his sword on every goblin he saw, until he finally felt full, and his eyes went back to normal. The greedy sword told him to keep killing monsters every now and then, so he wouldn't get to that point again. Suddenly, the Goblin King showed up, and the forest shook from his presence. Right then, Vit decided to take on the Goblin King. He hid, then jumped out at him, but the Goblin King looked intimidating. Vit tried to back off, but the greedy sword reassured him there was nothing to worry about, telling him to trust it. Feeling bolder, Vite charged at the Goblin King, stabbing his sword into him. That's when Vite's health regeneration skill kicked in. The greedy sword surprised him by saying that if he gave it those skills, it could give him new abilities. Vite asked what it would do with the skills, and the greedy sword said it would take on a new form. Vite asked how many skills it wanted, and the greedy sword insisted on having everything it had gained since they met. If Vite didn't give it the skills, it would lose the right to have them. Vite had no choice but to hand over his skills to the greedy sword. In that instant, the greedy sword turned into a magical bow and told Vite that someone had been watching him for a while, so they needed to shoot an arrow right away. Vite asked where he was supposed to get an arrow. The greedy sword ordered him to just pull back the bow, and arrows would appear on their own. Vite did it right away and hit the target. The next day, Vite caught Roxy in disguise and asked her why she was dressed like that and if she was going to the castle looking like that. Roxy whispered to him that she was going to town on a secret inspection, which Vite said explained the disguise. Then she told him not to tell anyone, especially Haro. Roxy remembered Haro's advice to act like a grown-up from the Hart family. Vite understood and apologized to Roxy, saying he'd get back to work, but then she suddenly grabbed him by the collar, saying she was taking him with her as her escort. Roxy walked fast, leaving Vite behind. He asked her to slow down. The greedy one chimed in, pointing out that calling Roxy Miss would draw attention. At the same time, Roxy asked him to say the same thing to Vite. The greedy one arrogantly claimed he had already told him that. Vite told him to shut up. Roxy then asked him who he was talking to, and Vite apologized, telling her not to worry about it. Roxy questioned why he didn't just call her Roki instead of Roxy. The greedy one noted that the name wasn't far off from her real one. Vite told him to shut up again, making Roxy feel sad, thinking he was telling her to shut up. She apologized, saying she could be annoying. Vite reassured her that she wasn't the one he meant. Roxy admitted she was really excited to be going out with him, making Vite blush, while the greedy one made a provocative remark about the good old days. Vite got mad at him, but Roxy stopped him, saying she wouldn't let him treat his sword badly. Vite apologized, while Roxy mentioned she hadn't seen his sword before. In a panicked look, Vite glanced at the greedy sword and remembered what it had said earlier about gluttony skills and the taste of souls. He thought he shouldn't let Roxy find out about the gluttony skill, but Roxy surprised him by skillfully taking the sword from him. Then she apologized for being curious. After looking at the sword, she told him it needed more care and that she would tell the Hart family blacksmith to take care of it. Then she handed the sword back and asked him to continue with their work. Vite followed Roxy, telling the greedy one he was happy for him now that someone would take care of him, but the greedy one didn't reply and told him to be quiet because he was enjoying Roxy's lovely scent. Vite jealously mentioned he might need to get rid of him and throw him away, but Roxy suddenly turned to him, asking him to hurry up. Vite quickly followed her until they reached the market, where Roxy stopped in front of some grapes. The seller then told her these grapes had just been picked from the Hart family farm that morning. Roxy asked to try one, and the seller handed her two. Vite tasted one and said admiringly that it was delicious. Roxy told him, of course, it was delicious since it was grown on their land. At that moment, the seller caught on to what Roxy said. Roxy put her hand over her mouth in embarrassment, while Vite saved her with the greedy one's quick thinking, telling the seller that a relative of Roxy worked on the Hart family farm. The seller understood the situation, while Roxy whispered to Vite that he had saved her cleverly. The greedy one then told him he owed him one, and Vite replied that he knew. Roxy asked him what was going on, and Vite told her he was just talking to himself. Suddenly all the eyes in the market turned toward one of the holy knights, and people began whispering that since the death of Mr. Maizen, the holy knights had been out of control in their actions. As the holy knight walked by Roxy and Vite, the greedy one said it was a perfect time for a fight. Vite told him to shut up, but the knight overheard him and approached Vite, questioning if he was the one who said that. Vite apologized, but the knight continued in anger, trying to stomp on Vite's head until Roxy intervened, saying that Vite had already apologized. The knight then asked her how she dared to respond to a holy knight. Before Roxy could answer, the knight said he remembered her from somewhere and then recognized her. At that moment, Vite realized Roxy was about to be revealed to everyone, and the greedy one whispered to him that they should pretend they were lovers. Vite, surprised, repeated, "Lovers?" At that moment, Roxy grabbed him, saying it was a good idea, and they pretended to be in love. She then apologized to the holy knight, who looked very surprised. Roxy left with Vite, as people commented on how it's impossible for her to be the Lady Roxy. Everyone began to disperse while Roxy held Vite's hand, watching the people's reactions from a distance. Vite heard her inner voice saying she had never held a man's hand like this before, so he immediately pulled away. Roxy then stood in front of a gem dealer, and Vite was stunned when she told him that, of course, as a girl, she was drawn to the gemstones. She pointed to several raw stones and asked the dealer if they were gems too. The dealer replied that you couldn't tell if they contained gems until they were opened. Roxy examined them curiously, and the dealer informed her that one could be bought for 10 copper coins, asking if she wanted to try her luck. Roxy replied that she was bad at luck. Then Vite started taking a look at the stones using his identification skill, and at that moment, he was surprised to see Roxy holding a gem and inspecting it closely. The dealer guessed she liked it and told Vite he would give him a discount if he wanted to buy it for his girl, but Roxy returned it to its place, thanking the dealer for letting her have a look. The dealer asked if she didn't like it, and she said she didn't think she would ever use it, and then she continued on her way. Vite caught up with her her and asked if she didn't have any acquaintances among the warriors. She replied that she had questions for the current warriors, not the retired ones. Suddenly, they overheard passersby talking about the dead goblins. One person said they died because of a wandering monster, while another remarked that couldn't be true. How could the orphanage in the poor neighborhood have goblin ears as a donation? Roxy then stopped the speaker and asked him to tell her more about this matter since she was investigating the wandering monster that had recently appeared near the capital. After that, Veit took Roxy to a tavern and introduced her to the bartender as Roki, his co-worker. The bartender told her to take care of him and told Veit he was amazed to see him alive with his girlfriend after all this time. Veit corrected him, saying she wasn't his girlfriend. The bartender apologized, saying he misunderstood. Moments later, the bartender mentioned he had heard about a warrior finding a mountain of goblin corpses, with their ears still attached, and making a lot of money from that. Roxy asked why the killer couldn't be a wandering monster. The bartender replied it was impossible. If there were a mysterious creature roaming around, travelers would spread the word. Suddenly, an old man entered the tavern, saying there was a popular theory that the wandering monster was a leech. Roxy worriedly responded that this monster would pose a big threat to citizens. The old man assured her that the Holy Knights would take care of it right away. In that moment, Veit was shocked and wondered what would happen if Roxy joined the hunt and saw him kill the goblin. Soon after, other warriors entered the tavern, and one approached Roxy, asking her to join him and enjoy his company. Roxy immediately stood up and pushed the man away, using her skills. Then one of the warriors remarked that only a holy knight could perform such a move. Roxy took out her hair tie, and the bartender recognized her right away, repeating, "Lady Roxy." Roxy apologized for deceiving him at first, and at that moment the warriors bowed before her, asking for her forgiveness. One offered her money, but she rejected it, stating that the Holy Knights were meant to protect people and create a world where they could laugh with the kingdom's subjects, just as her father dreamt. The old man then remarked that Roxy was just like her father. After that, Roxy sat chatting with the warriors. Later, she took Veit to get his greedy sword repaired, and he thanked her for that. She told him she learned a lot about the wandering monster thanks to him. Veit asked her why she didn't know about the hunt then. Roxy guessed to herself that the Valeric family was handling it and hadn't informed her. Suddenly, Roxy and Veit heard the three siblings teasing a child, so Roxy ran to the source of the noise, asking them to leave the kid alone. One of the siblings told her they were taking a lost child to protect him. Roxy ordered Veit to take the child, and he did. Then she asked Raval why he hadn't told her about the hunt for the wandering monster. He justified that he thought she was busy with her father's death. The three siblings left, and the child said he hated the Holy Knights. Roxy apologized, and he asked why she was apologizing. Veit asked if the child was lost, and he told him he couldn't find his mother. The two then began searching for the child's mother. At that moment, Veit remembered when he had gotten lost 5 years ago, and a Holy Knight had taken care of him too. Soon after, the mother found her child, and the kid bid them farewell. Then Veit returned home, thinking of a way to hunt monsters without Roxy finding out. He decided to wear a mask. The next day, Veit went to Roxy and presented her with a raw gem as a token of gratitude for giving him a job. Roxy told him she was very happy with his gift. Veit quickly went goblin hunting while wearing his mask, and warriors soon described him as the Lich, causing them all to flee the area. The next day, Roxy met Veit as he was doing his job. She told him that she had a secret mission for him, and then took him on a tour in her carriage. She pointed to a certain area and said it belonged to the Hart family. Veit admired the place and asked her if he would be picking grapes. She explained that she wanted to see the grapes up close after seeing them sold at the market that day. The carriage pulled up to the family home, and Roxy rushed to greet her mother, who had gotten out of bed to welcome her. Roxy scolded her for getting up, but her mother said she was feeling much better that day and asked who was with Roxy. Roxy explained that it was a servant she had recently hired, and she'd brought him along to introduce him to everyone. Veit then introduced himself to her mother, bowing respectfully. She told him her name was Aisha Hart, welcomed him, and said it was kind of him to visit. Veit thanked her, thinking to himself that she was a nice woman. Aisha then called him over and asked if he liked Roxy. Roxy shouted at her mother, wondering why she was suddenly asking Veit about that and where that idea came from. Aisha explained she was just curious how Veit saw his boss. This shocked both Veit and Roxy because they had misunderstood each other. Veit bowed to Aisha and said he cared deeply for Roxy and wanted to serve her for the rest of his life. At that, Roxy ran to her room, saying she needed to rest. Veit wondered if he'd said something wrong. Aisha told him Roxy always ran away when things got uncomfortable. She added that Roxy had cried a lot as a kid and would make a big fuss over seeing a small bug. Then, Aisha expressed her concern for Roxy, saying she couldn't believe she'd become a holy knight. She feared her daughter might be putting too much pressure on herself. Veit assured her that Roxy was an excellent holy knight and that people trusted her a lot, adding that she was diligently performing her duties as the head of the Hart family. In Roxy's room, she looked at her things and remembered when her father taught her how to hold a sword. He told her he couldn't believe she wanted to become a holy knight. Roxy assured him that her goal was to be a holy knight and laugh with the people. Her father had responded admiringly, saying that was befitting for the Hart family. The story continued as Veit worked alongside the the other workers in the grape farm. One of the workers offered him some freshly pressed grape juice, saying it would help with his fatigue. The worker proudly mentioned that the lords had helped on that farm for generations until they'd achieved that delicious grape flavor. Vite then asked if Lord Mason had also helped. The worker sadly replied that he'd heard Lord Mason died in Gallia, and his death must have been heartbreaking for Lady Roxy, which was why they weren't sure she would come to the farm that year. Vite then asked if Roxy helped with the harvest every year. The worker confirmed this, but also pointed out that she came to hunt monsters. Since harvest season for most crops meant many monsters would appear looking for food, the worker pointed toward the valley to the north and said they were dealing with a kobold monster in that area. Just then, Vite's stomach growled, and the worker remarked that he must be hungry after all that work. The scene changed, and Roxy ordered Vite to go home without her, as she still had a lot to do on the farm. Vite was walking home when a woman crossed his path. He stopped, and when he looked at her, he noticed her eyes were as red as his when he gets greedy. Vite lost his focus for a moment, and the woman asked if he was listening. She went on to say she must have come early. Vite asked early for what, and she said she'd come to hunt the kobold. Then she turned her back to him and told him he could hunt her instead, which would leave him in debt to her. The greedy Vite asked who the woman was, feeling like she knew something. Just then, Roxy caught up with Vite, looking at the woman and saying she seemed to be from Gallia. Vite asked if Gallia hadn't been destroyed, and Roxy confirmed it had, saying that 1,000 years ago, Gallia was a great military power, but was overwhelmed by a wave of monsters that led to the nation's collapse. Vite replied that there might still be survivors, but Roxy stated she hadn't met a pureblood Gallian yet. Vite then walked alongside Roxy and asked if she would be okay alone while hunting monsters. She told him she was a holy knight, and she'd also have warriors working with her. After that, the kobold monsters destroyed all the grape crops, so Roxy and her men lay in wait to take down the kobolds. When Vite spotted a kobold, he started drooling, while the warriors said they had no chance against that monster. Roxy told them she would capture and kill it, and instructed the workers to find a safe place until then, while she ordered the warriors to prepare for battle. One warrior told her they would need a day to get ready, and at that moment, Vite told himself that facing a level 50 monster was beyond his current abilities, but he couldn't ignore what was happening in Hart's lands. At night, Vite went to fight the kobold monsters, where greed transformed him into a bow, and he began shooting his arrows at the kobolds non-stop until the kobold king caught one of his arrows. Vite pulled back his arrow and lunged at the kobold king quickly, but the king struck him in the shoulder and then exhaled a strange energy that knocked Vite into a lake, leaving him unconscious. However, Vite pretended to be unconscious, and as a second kobold approached him, he suddenly got up and stabbed the kobold in the mouth, but the kobold king was still waiting for him. The greedy one then asked Vite to charge him with the power he had just obtained from the kobold he killed, and he transformed into a deadly and powerful weapon. Together, they defeated the kobold king, but worse, Vite fell into a frenzy from eating a monster that overwhelmed him for the first time. The greedy one urged him to hold on and not lose himself, warning that if he did, he would fall into a worse state than extreme hunger. The next day, Roxy examined the area and discovered some magical arrows. Afterward, she went home and discussed it with her mother and Vite, saying she'd seen a woman from Gallia days before who was one of the strongest holy knights, and she suspected she was the reason for the kobold's death. After that, Aisha called Vite to her room and asked him to stay close to her daughter and support her, assuring him that she felt he had the desire in his heart to be by Roxy's side. Aisha then elaborated that she had been a common girl with ordinary skills but had supported her husband. Still, she believed Roxy faced some challenges since only one of her parents was a holy knight. Aisha then broke down in tears, telling Vite that her days were numbered, so she wanted him to support Roxy in her stead. Vite agreed to her request, then he and Roxy headed back to the capital. He struggled to suppress his greed, since hunting goblins no longer satisfied his hunger after devouring the kobold. The greedy one reminded him that time was running out and he needed to find an alternative to satisfy his appetite before it was too late. Vite went to the tavern to think of a solution, where the old man Ed said that Mr. Hato would join the mission to hunt the lich. The bartender speculated that Hato was seeking quick glory through that mission, and the old man scoffed, suggesting the holy knight send Hato on a Gallia mission to become food for the monsters. Vite then wondered why there was a second mission to Gallia when Mr. Mason had just died. The old man replied that nothing had been decided yet. Not long after, Roxy knelt before her father's grave asking for his blessings, as she was chosen to go to Gallia. At that moment, Vite's voice came to her, begging her not to go there, or she might never return. She told him she had made her decision. On the other side, Mamel was celebrating the trap they set for Roxy to go to Gallia to get rid of her since she was a nuisance to them. Meanwhile, Hato told Mamel and Rafal that he wished to go with them to Tenburn. Mimel replied that it was a mission to seek immortality, not a trip. In the evening, Vite went fishing as usual, but Hadu and his friends blocked his way. Then, Hadu's companions asked him to deal with Vite, and Hadu allowed them. Some of them rushed at Vite with their swords, but Vite took them down while the others fled, despite Hadu warning them not to run away. At that moment, Hadu drew his sword and told Vite that he was just a beast and that he wouldn't escape. Vite removed his mask and revealed his head covering, shocking Hadu, who wondered how a scum like Vite could have such strength. Vite told him he wasn't obliged to explain anything, but Hadu arrogantly asked if he knew who he was dealing with, boasting that he was the second son of the Valeric family and a holy knight. This provoked Vite, who challenged him to show off the power of the holy knight he was so proud of. At that moment, Hadu wondered how Vite got so strong, while Vite asked his greedy sword if it could destroy a holy sword. The greedy sword said no holy sword made of orichalcum was better than it and told Vite to strike. Hadu called him a fool and asked if he was really going to fight from that distance. When Hadu charged at Vite and started summoning the holy sword's power, he was shocked to see Vite slice his sword in half without warning. Hadu yelled, "That's a holy sword. It can't happen." Vite threw the broken sword pieces at Hadu's feet and told him to pick them up. Hadu tried to run, but Vite cornered him, saying he thought Hadu was a true holy knight, but he was just pathetic. Vite remembered Hadu used to beat him and dragged him around, slamming him against rocks to teach him a lesson. Hadu begged Vite to stop, but Vite asked how he could beg after treating others like insects and sending Roxy into danger. Hadu begged again, but Vite ignored him and insisted on punishing him. Then his greedy sword turned into a mighty phoenix, glowing with strange light energy. When the light faded, Hadu was frozen, but amazed Vite hadn't killed him. Vite said he had questions, and Hadu wondered if they were about Roxy. Vite said Roxy chose to go to Gallia to save the people there. Vite raised his sword to Hadu, saying he would cancel Roxy's mission to Gallia but didn't want to kill him. Hadu begged Vite not to do anything stupid to get revenge for Roxy, but Vite stabbed the sword into Hadu's chest, saying this revenge was for himself. Instantly, Vite gained the holy sword technique skill, and the greedy sword said he was now a holy knight. Vite quickly transferred his stats to the greedy sword, and it transformed into a blade that could cut anything into nothing. Events unfolded, and Roxy prepared to leave for Gallia. Before getting into her carriage, Roxy looked at her servants and assured them their worried looks weren't necessary, emphasizing that the 3 years would pass quickly. She went to Haru and asked her to take care of things while she was gone. Haru also asked Roxy to serve honorably as the chief of the Hart family. Roxy then said goodbye to Oliver and Minerva, who wished her luck. She turned to say farewell to Vite, saying they would meet again. Vite asked her to take care of herself, and Roxy mounted her horse and rode off. Later, Haru gave Vite a recommendation letter from Roxy, left for him in case he wanted to work at another castle, far from the Valeric family. Vite took the letter, noting that Roxy cared about him until the end, but he couldn't accept it, as he would forge his own path as a warrior from now on. Afterward, Vite returned home and started preparing for his journey, saying that since he couldn't stop Roxy from going to Gallia, he could at least support her. The next day, Vite said goodbye to everyone at Hart Castle. Haru gave him money for his work, plus a severance bonus. Vite said the money seemed like a lot, but she replied that he shouldn't forget the pride that comes with serving the Hart family, then wished him good luck. Afterward, Vite went to say goodbye to the bartender and old man Ad, saying he had to go to Gallia. Somewhere else, Roxy announced to the Holy Knights that she had taken her father, Mason Hart's, position, and they would head out to defeat the Holy Dragon that had awakened after 1,000 years. They would also protect the royal capital, Seyfort, and its people. After Roxy finished speaking, she met a girl named Miria, who told her that she would be with her wherever she went. Then another person named Mogan approached. Mogan volunteered to go to Gallia as well, and then Miria teased him, saying that guys like him get a kick out of seeing a live natural disaster, the sacred dragon. She accused him of just wanting to find a chance to test his skills. Mogan replied that he couldn't deny most warriors look for chances to see how good they really are. Miria called him a dumb warrior, and then Roxy told her she was going too far. Mogan explained he volunteered mainly because of Mr. Mason, who he'd worked under before, and he wanted to get revenge for him. Roxy thanked him and asked if his family would be okay with him going to Gallia. Mogan responded that his daughter Rainey asked him to bring back some relics from Gallia. Roxy was surprised and asked, "Relics?" Mogan said he came from a long line of researchers and was the only warrior in the family. Meanwhile, the researcher in the lab was telling Rainey about the goblin samples killed by the lich known as the corpse, saying the arrows that hit the goblin weren't ordinary. Rainey looked at the samples thoughtfully and said they were magical arrows. Then she looked in one of the books and said those magical arrows are in a black sword, which is one of the deadly sin weapons. The researcher asked her what the deadly sins meant, and Rainey replied that she didn't know. Rainey wished she could see one of those deadly sin weapons. On the other side, the driver of Vite's carriage announced they were about to arrive in Tetra, a city where you can find the best goods in the south. Vite got off in Tetra and told Greedy that Tetra hadn't changed much. He'd passed through it 5 years ago on his way to the capital. After that, Vite met a carriage captain and asked him if he was headed to Gallia. The driver replied that he'd go tomorrow because if he traveled at night, monsters would attack him, asking him to come back in the morning. Right then, Greedy suggested they eat and gather information until morning, and maybe he could buy a new sheath since Vite had learned the holy sword technique. Vite agreed with his suggestion. Meanwhile, a guy was offering money to warriors to save his village and hunt monsters, but one of the warriors mocked him and started insulting him. Just then, Vite arrived and pushed the warrior away. Another warrior tried to attack Vite, but he defended himself. The man thanked Vite for saving him, and Vite told him he hadn't seen him in a while, calling him Sit. He then remembered how Sit and the other kids used to bully him, calling him a loser and throwing rocks at him. Back then, Vite turned to studying herbal medicine after he found out his father often got hurt hunting monsters. Then one day, his father died, and Vite sat crying at his father's grave, but the villagers showed no sympathy, telling him to leave because he was a failure, and they started throwing stones at him. Now, Sit knelt before Vite, asking for his help. Sit was the son of the village chief who had caused Vite's exile from the village. Vite was silent for a moment, and Greedy told him he needed to curb his greed, which would work out for him. Vite agreed to take care of the village's monsters, then Sit took Vite with him to the village. There, the villagers commented that Sit had brought back the trash they kicked out of the village, and couldn't even hire real warriors. Sit replied that he'd seen Vite's strength himself, and that Vite had become a strong warrior. At that point, someone said he'd bring another warrior tomorrow. Another replied that they'd been hearing screams from the nearby forest since yesterday, and they might not last until tomorrow. Their leader decided to use Vite as a sacrifice until morning. Sit asked Vite to ignore their words and just let it go. Sit then hosted Vite at his house and apologized. Vite told him he was used to it and asked about his wife. Sit told him the monsters had gotten to her. Then Sit's daughter appeared, and she told Vite that she realized she needed to change since her daughter was born. She told him she could see that he had indeed changed. Then she asked him about the monsters, and Sit told him the monsters had appeared a month ago and that they could fly. The villagers had decided to hire warriors because the monsters didn't look like any they'd dealt with before. Soon, Vite's stomach growled, and Sit went to get food while Greedy mentioned they were dealing with gargoyle monsters, which are known for being smart. Suddenly, Sit's daughter asked Vite who he was talking to, and he told her he was talking to himself. Then the little girl gave Vite candy. Shortly after, Sit returned with food, and Vite ate it, quickly losing consciousness. Right then, the little girl confessed to her father that she had fed Vite the candy her grandfather had given her, and Sit understood that Vite had taken a drugged candy. At the same time, the gargoyle monsters attacked the village while Vite was unconscious, despite Sayat's efforts to wake him. The leader started calling his followers to bring Vite so they could offer him as a sacrifice to the monsters. Meanwhile, Sayat prepared an antidote to revive Vite. After Vite drank the antidote, he woke up, and Sayat apologized, explaining that his father had drugged him. Vite told him to stay inside before drawing his sword and stepping out, only to find the gargoyle monsters setting the whole village on fire, turning the place into a nightmare. Vite froze in fear before a gargoyle that was breathing fire like a fireball. Sayat then suggested Vite use the great scythe weapon. Surprisingly, Vite's sword, Greedy, transformed into the great scythe, allowing him to split the gargoyle in two. He also gained the fireball skill. By that time, Vite had defeated the gargoyle, leaving only their leader, who had fireball and fire-resistant skills. Sayat told Vite the leader would get close to unleash a fireball at him, and that would be their chance to attack. Sure enough, the gargoyle leader approached to breathe fire, but Vite jumped up and struck him down with the great scythe. In that moment, Vite gained fire-resistance skill. The next day, Sayat and Vite surveyed the devastation caused by the gargoyle monsters. Sayat mentioned that his father had died, and only he and a few villagers survived, meaning the village was finished. Vite picked up some herbs and said they wouldn't be able to grow anything anymore. Sayat asked if he could use the identification skill, and Vite confirmed it. Sayat then wondered why Vite chose to become a warrior since he could earn a lot using that skill. Vite told him that he had no choice but to fight. At that moment, Sayat expressed his regret over what he had done to Vite in the past and asked Vite to hit him to atone for it. Greedy reminded him that Sayat wouldn't find peace until Vite did that. Vite then punched Sayat hard in the face, and Sayat thanked him. Vite then told him to take care of his daughter before going to his father's grave. He admitted that he hated seeing the village disappear despite all of its flaws. Meanwhile, Miria was telling Roxy that they were approaching the village of Lancaster. Roxy responded that they would look into resupplying once they got there. While Mogan warned her about the Lord of Lancaster, Roxy asked what he meant, and Mogan said she would see for herself when they arrived. At the same time, the carriage driver was chatting with Vite, telling him he yawned a lot and reminding him he would pay him 3 gold coins, so he needed to rely on him. Vite reassured him not to worry. He might not look like a warrior, but he was a good fighter, comparable to a novice holy knight. Suddenly, a group of bandits blocked the carriage driver's path, demanding he hand over valuable items if he valued his life. Vite jumped down to confront them, inviting them to face him first. The carriage driver clung to Vite's neck, begging for help since he had a wife and 2 children aged 6 and 7. Vite told him to move aside as he couldn't fight like that. At that moment, the bandit leader declared that their prey trembled in fear and ordered his men to take them out. But suddenly, a massive axe flew in, taking down all the bandits. Then, the same woman with red eyes appeared, telling Vite he owed her for a kobold kill and asked the carriage driver to take her along. He agreed, but as soon as she got into the carriage, it almost tipped over. The woman commanded her weapon to return to its original form, instantly changing the weight of the weapon. Inside the carriage, the woman recognized Vite and said, "So you're greedy, Vite?" He asked how she knew that, and she replied that she had a skill from the deadly sins too. Vite was surprised and asked if Greedy hadn't told him about it. She introduced herself as Main the Wrath, and quickly mentioned she was hungry. Veit gave her some dried meat, which she devoured immediately, even eating Veit's portion. In Lancaster, a girl was walking when two monsters crossed her path. A holy knight intervened and defeated them. The girl asked his name, and he introduced himself as the Lord of Lancaster, Rudolph. At the same time, Veit arrived in Lancaster and witnessed Rudolph's display. The carriage driver mentioned Lord Rudolph was getting ready to welcome a Gallia mission, which surprised Veit since Roxy was part of that mission. The driver then held out his hand for the 3 gold coins Veit promised, but Main snatched them, saying she was the one who saved him. The driver left, and Main fell asleep on Veit's arm while standing. He had to carry her, and as he walked, he was surprised to see the citizens welcoming him, thinking he was a holy knight. He wondered if they respected holy knights in this town. Veit kept walking until he reached an area only citizens could enter, but someone quickly came and let Veit through. Then, Veit noticed everyone he met had different marks on their necks. He asked Greedy about it, and Greedy guessed the marks were probably to show social classes. Meanwhile, Rudolph was punishing a warrior who ran away from hunting monsters, asking if he was trying to humiliate him. He stressed that his main goal was to become better than the Hart family, then killed the warrior. Veit was sitting on the bed across from Mine, asking Greedy how he knew Mine. Greedy said they were old friends who met every so often. The same was true for Laziness, Mine's weapon, since both belonged to the deadly sin weapons. Veit asked about these deadly sins, and Greedy listed them: gluttony, wrath, greed, sloth, lust, envy, and pride, which is why they're called deadly sin weapons. He pointed out that gluttony is considered a sin, making Veit wonder why he had that skill since he was always bullied. When he thought he'd gained power, he was surprised to find he had to fight just to survive, questioning the benefit of that skill. Greedy told him he needed to stay strong, or gluttony would consume him one day. He explained the key to resisting it was to stay close to hunger and satisfy his greed slowly. Later, Veit went to hunt a sand monster. He shot a fireball arrow at it, but was surprised by several other sand monsters. Meanwhile, Mine woke up in the inn, feeling hungry. She went downstairs and was surprised to see a bounty for anyone who defeated a sand golem. Someone mentioned even Lord Rudolph couldn't beat the sand golem, warning that if it stayed alive, people would keep dying. Veit succeeded in defeating the sand golem, and Greedy told him he could smell a crowned monster, which might be a special dish tonight. Some warriors were trapped by that monster, unsure how to handle it. Suddenly, Veit appeared and shot a fireball from his bow, declaring the monster was his prey. A warrior warned him he couldn't beat it alone, but Veit didn't care. The monster quickly shot fireballs at Veit, but he dodged them. Greedy warned him the monster would create a sandstorm and try to crush him with rocks after pulling him inside. Veit transformed Greedy into the Great Reaper weapon and prepared to attack. Veit fell onto the monster with the Great Reaper, causing the monster's core to drop into the sand. Veit changed his weapon to the Gearfalcon and destroyed the monster's core in the sand, gaining the sandstorm skill. The warriors remarked they'd never seen a fighter create such chaos. One of them approached Veit to thank him for saving them, introducing himself as Bard. Veit said he could also call him the Corpses. When Veit returned to the inn, he found Mine getting ready to hunt the sand golem. He shocked her by saying he already defeated it. Mine yelled that he took her reward, and Veit calmed her down, promising to give her half of what he'd get. They went together to claim the reward, which was 100 gold coins. Suddenly, Veit was cornered by Lord Rudolph and his men, who demanded Veit become his servant since he defeated the sand golem. Rudolph insisted he had no right to refuse. Mine stepped up and said she got Veit first, but Rudolph mocked her, saying a girl like her should stay home and drink her mother's milk. Mine swung her axe at him, creating a hole in the wall that Rudolph flew through. When Veit scolded her, she told him she wasn't a child. Then, Veit traveled with Main in the cart and asked her, puzzled, if she was sure she had the skill of anger rather than gluttony, pointing out that they had just bought that food supply, and yet she'd finished it. Main replied that anger needs a lot of calories, which made Veit wonder where all the food she ate went. Just then, Main got really angry, and her fury was so intense that it burst the cart's wheels. They stopped, and the driver started to fix the cart while Main wandered around the village. Veit went to find her but noticed the kids playing like crazy, so he figured the village was peaceful, even though it was close to Gallia, which was considered more dangerous because of the monster threats. Then Veit spotted a castle and wondered about it. Greedy told him it was Hausen. Veit expressed surprise, saying he thought only Seafort had a castle. Veit walked up to someone to ask about the mayor, explaining that he wanted to spend some time in the village. The man turned to him and said he was the leader there. Veit noticed that the leader had a holy sword and guessed he was defending the village. The leader then surprised Veit by saying he wanted to duel him, assuring him that if he won, he could stay in the village. The leader explained to Veit that he had just discovered his skill, and even though he was level 1, his stats exceeded 2 million. Veit was shocked and asked the leader when he realized his skills. The leader drew his sword and, seriously, asked if Veit would duel him or not. Veit immediately drew his sword as well, and they began their duel, but the leader was quicker and knocked the greedy sword from Veit's hand. The leader then sheathed his sword, and Veet picked Greedy up from the ground, telling the leader he understood he wasn't allowed to stay in the village for now. However, the leader told him he was welcome, but only if he trained under him while staying in the village. Veet asked why he wanted to train him, and the leader replied that it was just a whim of an old man. He explained to Veet that he didn't know how to deal with the recognition and wasn't fully benefiting from his other skills. When the leader told Veet that he felt his body couldn't handle its new strength yet, Veet was stunned. The leader added that he wouldn't lose anything by following his guidance. Veet pondered for a moment and thought to himself that he doesn't meet a holy knight every day, plus the man was willing to teach him for free. Veet then bowed to the leader and introduced himself, who told him his name was Haroon. Just then, Main arrived and Haroon asked Veet if she was his companion. Veet confirmed it, and Haroon quickly checked her out, saying she was indeed a high-level warrior. At that moment, Main pointed to a spot, telling Veet they could camp there. Veet replied that he had already found a place to stay. After that, things happened, and while Main was sleeping in her bed, Haroon was teaching Veet hand-to-hand combat first, as well as how to manage his stats. Haroon told Veet that he was aware he was struggling with that. Veet was shocked, and Haroon explained that all warriors who gain sudden strength face this problem. Haroon then started to give Veet instructions on how to manage his stats, asking him to stay calm and relax well, because the more tense he was, the weaker his movements became. Haroon explained that relaxation generates a great subconscious strength in a warrior. At that moment, Main woke up and sat watching them from a distance, complaining that she was hungry while Veet was giving it his all during training. Suddenly, one of Veet's eyes changed color, and he felt a rush of gluttony. Haroon noticed and asked if something was wrong with him, but Veet ignored the question and began to move faster and immerse himself more in the training. Haroon told him he was moving faster now. Veet said Haroon was a good teacher. Haroon quickly moved to kick Veet, but Veet was faster and dodged. Training ended, and Haroon said tomorrow they'd do actual combat. Then, Haroon went inside. Veet smelled a monster and figured a beast was in the castle, but he heard Haroon calling, so he went to him, surprised to see Main asleep on the floor after making a mess and spilling food everywhere. Veet apologized to Haroon, who said he'd ask the villagers to share food. After Haroon left to find food, Veet was surprised to see Haroon with his son and wife. Then, Greedy said Haroon's son looked like Veet. Veet figured there must be a reason Haroon was village chief in such a remote place. The next day, Haroon tossed a stick to Veet and asked him to block his sword attacks with it. Veet said the stick would break for sure. Haroon said he needed to figure it out. Haroon quickly charged at Veet with the sword, but Veet blocked it with the stick without it breaking. Haroon seriously said Veet could now control his stats. Afterward, Veet sat at the table to eat with Haroon, who asked if he was leaving tomorrow. Veet said yes, thanking Haroon for his hospitality to him and Main, and asked Main to thank him too, but Main was scarfing down her food. Veet apologized to Haroon for Main's behavior, and Haroon said he had plenty of meat and vegetables and to let Main eat until she was full. After that, Veet noticed Haroon constantly looking at Hausen Castle and asked why. Haroon said it was his castle, but he had to flee 15 years ago on royal orders because his family and people were victims of a crown monster. Since then, Hausen had been controlled by Lord Lich, the harbinger of death, and his family was still in his grip. Suddenly, Veet stood up and said he had to go out for a bit. Haroon followed him, guessing he was going to the castle, and said he'd go with him. Then Main came up and said she'd protect the village while they were gone for 50 gold coins. Soon, Veet and Haroon went to the castle, where Haroon was surprised Veet took someone down with magic arrows enhanced by petrification from the sandstorm skill. Haroon said that technique wasn't studied anymore in the capital because it was too complex. They kept going, and skeletons surrounded them. They both showed off their skills fighting the skeletons. Once inside, Haroon was amazed to find the castle full of life, as if nothing had happened, and even his wife and son welcomed him. Haroon approached them and asked if they were alive. His son Luke asked what he meant, while his wife Diana said he must be tired. Luke asked if Haroon had finished the king's task, and Haroon said he had. Veet, confused, asked what was happening. Greedy said it was an illusion spell. They might look alive, but they were dead. Veet was horrified to realize it was all an illusion. Then, Veet was shocked to see Luke trying to stab Haroon with a sword. He yelled to Haroon, but Haroon said he was strong. Luke stepped back, saying Haroon deserved to die for abandoning them and leaving for duty in the capital. Because of that, he had to protect the castle and the people until the monsters got to them. Haroon was silent while Luke asked why he came back just to kill them when they were still alive. Veet tried to take control, but Haroon asked him to let him deal with his family. Veet then went to find Lich while Haroon fought Luke in a sword fight. On the other side, Veet located Lich. He charged at him, but was shocked to see Lich controlling corpses, forcing them to surround Veet. He felt a little tense, but soon Haroon came to him, apologizing and dropping some corpses, saying he had severed their limbs to disable them. Haroon quickly drew his sword and summoned the power of the Greater Cross, creating a huge flash to repel Lich. Veet then urged Haroon to combine his sword with his to eliminate Lich faster. Haroon agreed, and their swords fused. unleashing immense energy. After that, the scene changed, and Harun sat before the corpses of his son and wife, apologizing to them for taking so long to free them from their suffering. Their spirits then appeared and told him he had saved them in the end. Harun asked for their forgiveness and bid farewell to their spirits, asking them to wait for him until he joined them. After Harun finished saying goodbye, he told Veit there were still skeletons he needed to deal with, and Veit joined him. They then returned late to Main, who scolded them. Veit calmed her down while Harun gave her more money than she asked for. Veit called her a greedy mercenary. She told him one needs money to rebuild an entire village, and he'd know that if he lived long enough. Harun then remembered he had seen Main 50 years ago when the monsters first appeared, telling her she hadn't changed since then and still had a sharp look. She replied that perhaps he would catch up to her level after a millennium, pointing out that she was a specter not allowed to die. Veit then asked in surprise, "Spectre?" Main continued saying he should repay her now. At that moment, Harun instructed Veit to return to him once he completed his mission because he wanted to tell him something important. On the other hand, Rafal and Mamil returned from their journey, and Mamil said that the Philosopher's Stone could cure any disease or injury, but she didn't think they would find it, so perhaps immortality was close. Suddenly, a servant interrupted them, informing that Heido had died during their absence, but he was killed by a warrior, not a monster. As events unfolded, Veit and Main were inside the carriage. Veit asked her why she ate so much, noting that she was close to consuming all the supplies that Harun had given them. He asked if she was sure she had a skill for anger and not gluttony. The carriage's captain chimed in that they had had that discussion before. At that moment, Main tasted some food for Veit and immediately lay down on his lap. He questioned why she didn't sleep on the ground, to which she replied that the ground was hard. Before he could say anything else, he found that Main had fallen asleep. Meanwhile, Miria was asking Roxy when they would reach Gallia. Roxy informed her that they were close to the border now, while Mogan stated that they were about to reach Hausen. Soon, they arrived at Harun's castle in Hausen. When Miria expressed her admiration for the castle, Roxy mentioned that Mr. Harun used to live there. Miria then asked about the current lord of the castle. Roxy replied that a Lord Leech was in control now, but looking at it now, she felt no presence of any monsters. Mogan guessed that the castle might have been liberated from Leech. Just then, Harun welcomed them after introducing himself. Miria impulsively asked him if he had not retired, which Roxy scolded her for. Mogan bowed to Harun, stating that he was honored to meet the head of the Barbados family, one of the 5 great families, and he couldn't believe he was meeting the skilled swordsman Harun Barbados, known as the Sword of Light. At that moment, Roxy apologized to Harun for barging into Hausen like that. To her surprise, Harun remarked that she'd grown up a lot. When she asked how he knew her, he told her he was an old friend of Mason and Aisha, and he was actually the one who gave her her name when she was born. Roxy was stunned, saying her parents had never mentioned that before. Mogan teased her, saying he was jealous because a hero like Harun had named her. Harun clarified that he used to be a hero and continued, explaining that after he failed to protect the people he was supposed to protect, he didn't feel the need to fight anymore. Roxy asked him skeptically if he had dealt with Lord Leech, and Harun told her a young man had helped him with that. Mogan commented that the young man must be a talented warrior to have taken down a crowned beast. Miria eagerly asked about this young man, wanting to meet him, but Harun told her he was gone. Roxy then asked for the young man's name, so she could let the capital know how they defeated Lord Leech. Harun apologized, saying he couldn't reveal the young man's name, remembering when Veit had asked him not to tell anyone if asked. Harun told Roxy that the young man wanted him to keep his name a secret, and he apologized for that. Roxy understood and turned to continue on her way, but stopped when Harun asked if she was headed to Gallia. She asked how he knew, since she hadn't told him. He claimed that the only reason a young holy knight would come there was because of a request from the Valeric family. Roxy told him she volunteered on her own, but Harun insisted she was being manipulated, claiming that the Barbatos and Hart families had always been a pain for the Valerics. Roxy replied that she inherited her father's ideals and would protect people no matter what. Harun was surprised to hear about Mason's death and offered to train Roxy, and she agreed. Harun started training her, sword fighting against her. On the other side, Veit and Main arrived at a deserted place that looked like ruins. Veit asked her why the place looked abandoned. Main replied that she was born there and was taken to the imperial capital right after she was born, so she didn't remember anything, but it was important to her. Veit mentioned he thought Gallia was destroyed 0 years ago. Main took a few steps forward with Veit following, and he was shocked to see a cocoon in front of him. Veit then asked the glutton about it, and the glutton explained that it was a chimera, a biological weapon the Gallia army tested back in the day, but it was a complete failure. At that moment, Main declared it was time to repay her debt. Veit asked if they were going to fight that thing, and she told him it was still in the larval stage and hadn't grown, so they could beat it. Veit asked what they should do, and she told him they needed to destroy its spirit. Veit understood that she wanted him to use his gluttony skill. Main rushed toward the cocoon and smashed it, revealing a massive monster inside. Veit then noticed a woman trapped inside the monster, but Main told him that was just to scare him. She told him to fight the monster directly without looking at it, but Veit Vite felt bad for the woman, saying if he consumed the monster's spirit, she would suffer. Main assured him that the woman was the essence of the monster and he had to eliminate her, not to be fooled by appearances, because that woman was a beast disguised in human skin. Suddenly, the monster's essence lit up and molten lava erupted everywhere. Vite and Main ran, and Vite asked the glutton for the great harvester weapon. The glutton told him the harvester wouldn't be able to cut through the lava. Main then told Vite to retreat and struck the lava with her axe, separating the lava from where they were. They split up to fight, and Vite used petrification arrows to stop the monster, but he was shocked to see the monster easily regenerating its lost parts while Main attacked it. Vite noticed that Main's weapon, laziness, had gotten stronger. The glutton explained that laziness gets stronger every time it's swung, but it makes the wielder less agile. Suddenly, after one of Main's strikes, the monster transformed and sprouted wings. Main told Vite to hide behind her. Vite warned her he'd go into a ravenous state soon, and Main told him to chill, lest he get overcome by gluttony. He said he knew that. Then, Vite's eyes changed color real quick, and he told Main to fight back too. Main slammed her axe into the ground while Vite jumped up, telling the glutton to turn into a blood termagant. They attacked together, but the monster threw up a magic barrier. Vite tried to cut through it with the great harvester, but no luck, so he had to check the stats to find the barrier's weak spot. He hit it, but the woman inside the monster's core looked at him, distracting him, and the monster ran off. Main told Vite to hop on her axe quick so she could chase it. Vite was shocked to see his eye bleeding, but still sat on the axe. Main chucked him into the air to go after the monster. The glutton told Vite he could level up to 2 and change form, and Vite told him to do it. The glutton transformed, telling Vite to aim right for the magic core, but to be careful. Just as Vite was about to aim, the woman trapped him in a magic barrier, saying she was gonna burn herself alive and take him with her. But Vite was faster, stabbing her in one quick move with his blade. Right then, Vite saw messed up memories of a group of people, but he didn't recognize them. After that, his gluttony skill kicked in, but he was surprised he didn't feel his usual excitement. The glutton explained it was because he'd just eaten one of his own kind. Vite then asked Main if she knew that woman. She said if anyone became a chimera, they had to be killed. Vite then asked her to kill him if he ever lost it one day, since she was the only one who could stop him. Main hugged him, promising she would, and thanked him. Afterward, he told her he was heading to Babylon and asked where she was going. She said she promised the others she'd build them a village, and had a feeling he'd be dead before they met again. Right then, Vite got the magic shield, and Main left. Vite asked her to wait and help him level up, but she was gone. As things went on, Vite got to Babylon, the fortress that separated the kingdom from Gallia, with walls made of steel that had held off monsters for thousands of years. On the way, the glutton pointed out the Babylon gate that led to Gallia. Vite asked if he knew the way, and he said he'd been there with his previous owner, who died and left him behind. Then, Vite got to Babylon's north gate and was shocked that a meat skewer cost 5 times as much as it did in the capital. Suddenly, Babylon's new lord arrived from the capital in a procession, and Vite was stunned to see it was Roxy. Then the glutton started telling Vite that Babylon had all sorts of warriors, like skilled mercenaries, ex-holy knights, and people who hated the holy knights. He said that if you were strong enough, you could get away with anything in Babylon, since they needed all the help they could get to deal with the monsters. Vite said it sounded like the perfect place for him. Meanwhile, someone greeted Roxy, introducing himself as Northern Alistair, saying he was honored to serve Lady Roxy, heir to one of the 5 families. Roxy asked if he was in charge of keeping order in Babylon while her dad was away, and thanked him for his service. Northern said he was responsible for order, but he couldn't save Mr. Mason and apologized. Roxy told him to look up, saying she was there to follow in her father's footsteps, and they had to defend Gallia from the monster hordes. Roxy shook his hand, and Miria noticed Northern staring hard at Roxy. Miria then said they should go save Lady Roxy because she was in danger, but Mogan grabbed her by the neck, telling her she was being dumb and messing with a sacred knight could get her killed. At the same time, Roxy told them to take a walk with her around town, while Vite was wandering around, thinking he needed 10 gold pieces for a room and another for breakfast, realizing his money wasn't going to be enough for anything. Suddenly, the greedy one told him to stop, saying there was a sheath that felt like it was calling to him. Vite looked at the sheath and said it looked expensive. The greedy one begged him not to be cheap, saying he could make a lot hunting monsters. Right then, the sheath vendor showed up and asked Vite if he was looking for him, but before Vite could answer, the vendor rushed over, checking out his cloak and saying the burns were from fireballs, maybe something even hotter. Vite was surprised and asked if he could tell that, and the vendor said he could. The greedy one told Vite that the man had a good eye for details, so they should buy the sheath from him. When Vite asked about the price, the vendor said it was just for show and he could make a proper sheath for his sword. Vite agreed, and as the vendor started working, he said he admired how Vite held his sword with one hand. Then the vendor thought for a second and told Vite that a sheath for that sword would be around 500 gold pieces. Vite grabbed his sword and left, telling the vendor to forget about it. He kept walking, telling the greedy one that prices were too high in Babylon, and they should figure out what they needed every day before buying fancy stuff. Just then, someone called out to Vite, asking if he wanted to join them and volunteer as a soldier in the capital. Vite apologized, saying he didn't want to join anyone. The man guessed he used to be a knight, but his appearance didn't show it. The man and his buddies left Vite behind. Then Vite decided to fix up his appearance so people like that man wouldn't mess with him. He went monster hunting and made a lot of money. When he got to Gallia, there were monster bodies everywhere, and the smell was awful, with toxic algae spores floating around. The greedy one warned Vite not to breathe deep, or the algae would grow in his lungs. He said a monster delegation was coming, the orcs, a common type of monster in Gallia, adding that they used simple weapons but were pretty smart. He told him to fight them like they were humans. Vite drew his sword, saying it was a good chance to test the skills Aaron taught him, but he was surprised to see the same man who had asked him to join fighting the orcs. He stopped, but the greedy one told him to move and fight the orcs because he wanted a new sheath. Vite hesitated, but the greedy one said the orcs were a lot of them, and looked like they were planning to ambush the monster hunters from both sides. Vite was convinced and charged at the orcs, who started shooting fire arrows at the hunters. At that moment, the greedy one turned into a magical shield that looked like a fortress, and told Vite to run toward the orcs and not stop. Vite immediately carried out the command. As he charged toward the orcs, every orc that touched the shield exploded and fell to the ground. When the battle was over, Vite was surprised the greed skill hadn't triggered this time. The greedy one asked him if he felt that was because he took down the monster, Hanayome. Vite confirmed he did. The greedy one responded that they now had to cut off the orcs' ears and return to the city to claim the reward. Sure enough, Vite went to collect the reward, but the other monster hunters threatened him, accusing him of trying to steal their loot. They started ganging up on him to take the reward, but he fought them all off and succeeded. Meanwhile, the clerk in the reward office finished counting the orc ears and awarded Vite 100 gold pieces while calling him Mr. Corpse. Suddenly, he heard Roxy's angry voice asking if he was responsible for the chaos. A few moments later, Roxy said she understood the situation. He only attacked them after they started it, and his actions were in self-defense. Vite then asked her what his fate was now, and Roxy told him that he had somewhat overreacted, but she wouldn't punish him this time since she was partly responsible for the decline of order in Babylon. Roxy then turned to the monster hunters and told them she would overlook their actions as well, on the condition that they spend the night in jail. At this point, Vite got lost in memories with Roxy. She called him, wondering if he was listening, but Miria informed her that he wasn't, and began to attack him, trying to remove his mask, claiming he should reveal his face when talking to Lady Roxy. Mogan told her that masks were part of a warrior's equipment, while Roxy asked her to stop. Vite thanked Roxy, but she asked him his name. He told her he was called Corpse. Roxy then asked him not to cause any further trouble and advised him to pay more attention to his appearance, since it was somewhat distracting. Suddenly, Vite dashed off in front of her like a cannonball, leading her to wonder what was wrong with him. Mogan informed her that Vite looked thin and appeared weak at first glance, but he wondered what kind of warrior he was, since he had defeated everyone. On the other side, Vite wandered around the town, chatting with the greedy one and guessing that Roxy hated him. At that moment, the vendor appeared in front of him, telling him he heard about Vite's victory over the savages, and offered him to wear his equipment during battles. He introduced himself as Jid, mentioning he opened his shop 3 months ago. Here, Vite understood that Jid wanted him to wear the equipment to promote it and boost Jid's reputation in town. Jid confessed that he had been looking for a suitable warrior for this and asked if Vite wanted to work with him. Vite stood up and shook Jid's hand, confirming that there was no reason to refuse such an offer. Shortly afterward, Jid prepared Vite to look like a real warrior. The greedy one marveled at how good he looked, while Jid stated that the entire equipment cost only 80 gold pieces. The greedy one was astonished, thinking Jid wouldn't charge him since Vite would be promoting his equipment. However, Jid offered to take only half the price. After that, Vite headed off to find something to satisfy his hunger. He entered a bustling tavern and saw many people gathered around a woman. The moment Vite glanced at her, he felt drawn to her intensely. The woman approached him, confirming she had been waiting for him, and even called him by name. Vite was surprised and wondered how she knew him, even though he was wearing a mask. The woman told him they were peers after all and that she was Eris the Desire. After that, the two sat together. Eris asked Vite to take off his mask because she wanted to see him up close. Vite asked her why she had been waiting for him. She told him she'd been watching him since he was in the capital, and when the skill of greed was about to weaken within him, she thought about talking to him but hesitated, knowing he'd meet the greedy one sooner or later. Vite then asked if she knew about Maine too. She replied that she was from the second generation and thus didn't know anyone from the first generation well. She then congratulated him on killing Hanayome, clarifying that all chimeras come from the capital of Gallia, which made her curious about who transferred the cocoon to where it was found. She told him that there were likely many more cocoons, which would be dangerous, and the sacred knights wouldn't be able to handle them. Eris quickly told him she waited for him because she she was the protector of the kingdom along with her skill, and since she was a guardian of the kingdom, she prioritized the kingdom's interests over anyone else's. Vite asked her what she was aiming for, and she said, Roxy Hart. On the other side, Roxy was reviewing Northern's plans, who told her there was a rush in the east of the capital. She ordered him to move there immediately. Meanwhile, Vite was enraged at Eris, accusing her of madness for wanting Roxy dead, arguing that this would create a crowned human generation. Yet Vite contended that killing Roxy wouldn't bring anything good to anyone. He then left, determined to protect Roxy, while Eris internally noted that the plan had already begun. Roxy learned from Nordren that they'd lost contact with the forces sent to gather raw materials from Gallia, so she ordered Nordren to prepare the troops to chase after them and rescue them immediately. Meanwhile, Jid was telling Vite that he needed magical crystals to make the perfect sheath for his sword, as they were difficult to obtain. However, he'd recently heard that the royal army was overseeing the stockpile of magical crystals, so the greedy one suggested to Vite that they go collect the crystals themselves. Vite asked Jid where those crystals were, and Jid replied that they were located in Gallia. Vite then said he would go get them, to which Jid informed him he would get a discount in that case and gave him a map that belonged to his teacher, who was a soldier in his youth, explaining that the indicated places were very far to the south, near the Great Valley. Events quickly unfolded as Vite stood in Gallia facing monsters, telling the greedy one that he would use the protective shield. The greedy one remarked that it was a good choice. Then Vite charged at the monsters using the shield. Soon, the mission was successful, activating his gluttony skill. On the other side, Miria was trying to use a compass to reach the Great Valley, but Nordren surprised her by saying that the compass didn't work in that area. Miria asked him how they would get to the valley, and Mogan replied that they would likely find their way by following the moon and stars, but unfortunately, the clouds were obscuring them. Roxy then thought for a moment and suggested they could reach the Great Valley by tracking the orcs' trail, but she quickly realized that there were more monsters than orcs in Gallia, and there were also monsters heading in the direction they would take. So, Roxy warned her team to be careful as they advanced. Elsewhere, Vite took a short break while the greedy one told him he was starting to show the desired behavior, as a warrior must always rest well before battle. Suddenly, Vite dozed off and found himself in a strange place with the Chimera girl, Haniel, in front of him. She seemed to be trying to tell him something, but he couldn't hear her because of the noise. Then, Vite noticed he was standing in a place resembling a pool of blood filled with many monsters and people. Hadu emerged from that pool and pulled Vite into it. Vite woke up then and told the greedy one he felt monsters were closing in, and these weren't orc monsters. The greedy one suggested Vite use his night vision to check them out. Vite did, and saw they were salamander monsters, 4 of them. Right then, the greedy one planned for them to kick things off with petrification magic using the black bow. Vite fired his first arrows at the salamanders, but asked the greedy one to hold on a sec, because he sensed something weird about one of them. The greedy one confirmed he was right, because salamanders usually run when they're badly hurt. Vite then wondered why they weren't fleeing or attacking, guessing something was controlling them. The greedy one suggested they follow the salamanders instead. Meanwhile, chaos broke out among Roxy's forces, as salamander monsters surrounded them, breathing fire and causing panic. Roxy called out for Nordren, worried where he was, and suddenly Nordren showed up, injured and apologizing to Roxy. Mogan was behind Roxy, trying to shield her from the salamander's flames. Just then, Roxy noticed the salamander's heat had completely melted the ground. Miria threatened the salamander, drawing her magic sword to defend Roxy, but it didn't work. Instead, the salamander attacked her. Roxy ran to her, anxious, telling her she was foolish for using the magic sword against the salamander. Just as the salamander was about to finish off Roxy and Miria together, Vite jumped in front of it with his protective shield, blocking the flames. He asked Roxy if she was okay. Before she could answer, Vite quickly dashed toward the salamander, which was getting ready for another attack. Mogan was amazed by Vite's skill, saying he couldn't believe someone could get that much power from a simple skill like sharp edge. After the fight, Roxy thanked Vite for his help, saying more of her soldiers would have died without him. But when she asked Miria to thank Vite too, Miria refused, saying she hadn't asked for his help. Then, Mogan introduced himself to Vite, saying he was the unit leader, and that the foolish one was Miria. Roxy introduced Nordren, telling Vite he was a holy knight entrusted with protecting Babylon. Nordren thanked him, grateful for being saved. Vite mentioned something else was bothering him, and pointed to the emblem marked on the heads of the 4 salamanders. Miria agreed it was suspicious, while Mogan noted that monsters don't usually work together, and he'd noticed they were cooperating to target Lady Roxy. Roxy thought it could just be a coincidence. Nordren commented that things in Gallia had become unpredictable, especially since the Holy Dragon left its lair. After that, Vite led them to the Great Valley, and Roxy thanked him, while Mogan said they were lucky Mr. Gutha was heading the same way. Miria then asked Vite to forgive them, as they needed to hurry to rescue the supply unit. Just then, Roxy tried to shake Vite's hand to say goodbye, but Miria grabbed Vite's hand, interrupting the moment. Roxy apologized to Vite, while Vite was shocked because he heard Miria's inner voice when she grabbed his hand, calling him a curse and wishing he would just leave without getting near her lady. After that, Veit continued on his way until he reached a place where the air was incredibly pure, guessing it was from an ancient battle. He then found a petrified monster in his path, and later found a monster graveyard. At that moment, the greedy guy asked if he'd found the magic crystals, and Veit remembered Jid's words about the crystals, that they were colorless and transparent but had a purple sparkle. He said he hadn't seen anything like that. Suddenly, he spotted Eris nearby, but she quickly ran off. Then the greedy guy saw a giant chimera and pointed it out, telling Veit that it was probably buried there after some old battle. Its head was starting to stick out because of erosion. Veit wondered if Eris was behind that. Suddenly, he heard an explosion coming from where Roxy was searching, so he ran over there right away. Miria was there, holding her sword up to the monsters, saying she'd protect Lady Roxy, but the monsters were super violent, like bombs. When one of the giant monsters showed up in front of Roxy, she was surprised by a fire arrow that flew right at the monster. When she turned to see where it came from, she saw Veit, and she said in disbelief, "Mr. Gutha?" Veit asked if she was okay, and she said yes, explaining that Mogan got hurt trying to protect Miria, and Nordrin was hurt too. Veit looked at the monsters and said they didn't heal as fast as the chimera, and that their weak spot was their core. Roxy asked what he meant, and he pointed to the monster's chest, asking if she could see the cores stuck in their chests, explaining that those were the cores that made them move, and they needed to get rid of them. Roxy said she was ready, and they both charged at the monster that was shooting fire at them, trying to cover its core with its hands. But Veit stood strong against the flames, and told Roxy to go ahead and destroy the monster's core. Meanwhile, Miria was helping out by using flamberge flames to block the monster's flames. After they took down the first monster, Roxy told Miria to get the troops to safety, saying she and Mr. Gutha would handle the rest of the monsters. They both rushed into battle, side by side, while the monsters shot flames. Soon, one of the monsters jumped up and then fell, making a crack in the ground that knocked Roxy off her feet, but Veit caught her before she fell. After that, Veit found himself falling into some kind of cave with Roxy next to him, telling him she'd be fine once she rested a bit. Veit said that was expected from a holy knight and asked if they'd gotten the supplies. Roxy told him they arrived only to find all their troops burned to death. Roxy then asked how he knew about the chimera, and Veit said a girl had told him about them. Roxy asked if that girl had a giant axe, confirming she had seen her on her way. She also heard rumors that she'd crushed the Lord of Babylon with her axe, and some people were saying she was traveling with a young guy wearing a skull mask. Veit told her she'd been with him, making Roxy laugh and say he reminded her of someone she knew who was in the capital now, but she felt like he was right there. Then she asked if Veit was happy right then. Veit told her he was definitely happy because someone cared about him that much. Just then, Veit's eye color changed, and he covered it with his hand, telling Roxy not to look. He ran toward the monster and stabbed his blade into its chest. After Veit beat the monster, he noticed it had the same symbol as the salamanders. He remembered Eris saying that Roxy would die in Gallia and that she would pay the price. Roxy then caught up with him, saying they would be okay now. Suddenly, the place collapsed, and Veit shielded her with his armor. Magic crystals appeared, shaped like petrified monsters. After that, Roxy reunited with her friends, saying she was happy they were safe. The events continued to unfold, and after returning to Babylon, Veit was surprised to find Roxy challenging him to a sword duel. He asked her if he had done something wrong, and Miria told him he'd been involved in 56 violent incidents with other warriors. She insisted he not play innocent, as he had also destroyed 20 facilities. All this happening just 1 month after they got back from the Great Valley. Veit defended himself, saying all those were attacks against him. Roxy, however, told him she wouldn't overlook any acts of violence he had committed. When he asked her what she wanted, she ordered him to join the royal army, assuring him that if he did, even the rowdiest warriors would avoid him. Veit replied that he wasn't looking to be anyone's follower because freedom was everything to him. Roxy said she expected that response and gave him a choice: either face her in a duel or think about the consequences of his actions in prison. Veit drew his sword and charged at her quickly, and both displayed their swordsmanship in front of the audience. However, he soon admitted to himself that he couldn't defeat Roxy, even though he was supposed to have the advantage according to his stats. Greed reminded him then that Roxy was a holy knight above all else. Roxy warned him again that she didn't intend to take the duel lightly. Veit then thought to himself that this was called the technical skills a knight gains through daily practice. Suddenly, he got lost in Roxy's eyes, and when he snapped back to reality, Roxy had passed him, realizing she was after his mask. Roxy charged at Veit again swiftly, but he dodged her attacks and jumped back. She told him to take it seriously if he didn't want to reveal his identity because dodging wouldn't lead him to victory. Veit decided to comply with her order, activating his holy sword technique. The onlookers, including Roxy, were astonished, and she asked how he could use that technique without holding a holy sword. He explained that his sheath was specially made for his sword, enhanced for holy sword techniques, and crafted from magical crystals he gathered from the Great Valley himself. Roxy, puzzled, asked if he was a former holy knight since he had the ability to wield such techniques. Veit confirmed that he was just a warrior, and then he charged fiercely at Roxy, who immediately blocked his sword. As a result of their clash, they both staggered back. Veit then noticed the necklace Roxy wore, made from the raw gemstone he had given her, and his mind wandered slightly. Roxy swiftly knocked his sword away, saying he had left an opening. Vite admitted she won, and picked up his sword again. Miria arrogantly stated that Roxy wouldn't lose to someone like him, while Roxy asked Vite why he suddenly eased up during the fight. When she asked what she meant, she warned him not to play dumb. Vite tried to ignore her words and walk away, but she stopped him, asking if he learned his fighting skills from Mr. Haroun. She confirmed she knew because she had also learned from Haroun on her way to Babylon. She then recalled when Haroun told her he decided to wield the sword again after meeting a young man heading to Gallia, affirming that this young man possessed immense power that had caused him trouble. At that moment, Roxy tried to offer Vite something, but he interrupted, stating the problem was his own, and advised her to think about protecting herself in Gallia only. Vite turned to continue on his way until he was stopped by Mogan, who said it was impressive, and considering his skills, it was no wonder he had been able to kill that beast. Vite paused briefly when Mogan asked if he also thought someone was controlling that beast. He told Mogan he had examined the beast after killing it and noticed it bore the same salamander insignia. Mogan replied that his family had studied Gallia's lost technology for generations, and his father was a talented researcher, as was his daughter. Vite explained that the Chimera was an artificial monster specifically designed using Gallia's technology. He offered to let Mogan's daughter examine one of the Chimera beasts. Mogan asked if he was trying to get to know his daughter, and before Vite could respond, Mogan nervously raised his weapon and told him he wouldn't allow him to meet his daughter, Rain. Mogan then began to run after him. Vite told him it was just a suggestion. In the lab, the researcher was telling Rain there were rumors that Rafal had locked himself in his room to study the Philosopher's Stone. Rain responded in surprise. The Philosopher's Stone? The researcher informed her that Rafal might have gotten it from Timbrin because he had gone there on a journey before Hadu died. Rain immediately picked up a book, looking for the Philosopher's Stone, stating it could heal all injuries and grant immense power, but at the same time overpower one's mind and body. On the other hand, Vite was in the inn thinking about what Main had told him, where she said he had to aim for the E-Realm. Vite then asked her what the E-Realm meant. Main explained that it was a power level where the Holy Dragon exists, and if he couldn't reach it, he wouldn't be able to fight the dragon. She also warned him not to push himself too hard, as he could lose control and let his skills surpass him. Suddenly, Vite was jolted from his distraction by an alarm, while Northern was simultaneously informing Roxy that a death march was approaching them. Roxy decided to move to confront them, while Vite also set off to assess the situation, saying, "So this is the death march." At that moment, Roxy appeared with her royal army. Greed told Vite that something was approaching the royal army from the east. Vite looked around carefully and discovered that this thing was moving through the ground like a whale swimming in water, and its size was enormous. Vite then realized that if this creature continued to move this way, it would reach the royal army soon. He said that since Roxy and the others were focused on the death march, they would definitely be in big trouble if they faced a surprise attack. Vite then used his bow, determined to charge his shot using his greed skill boost, and fire a spiraled shot to penetrate this underground creature. Suddenly, the creature appeared before Vite. He jumped up, charging at it with his sword. He recognized the monster as the Earth Violator Omega Slime, a monster whose endurance rating surpassed 10 million. At that moment, Greed informed him that even the Holy Knight himself wouldn't be able to confront this beast, advising him to transform into the magical armor. As the Omega bombarded him with its horrible-smelling DNA, Vite quickly defended himself with the protective armor. Greed warned him not to touch the Omega's DNA, stressing it contained corrosive magic as well, and he would die if he touched it. He also cautioned against splitting the Omega, as its DNA would spread everywhere, causing Vite's bones to corrode to the end. Vite then asked what they should do. Greed suggested they eliminate the Omega with fireballs, and indeed Vite did so, but he was shocked that the Omega vanished for a moment, before falling through a crack in the ground and continued moving towards the royal army. Vite tried to follow it, but the Omega cut him off by splitting into smaller parts that began to attack him, trying to delay him from saving the royal army. However, Vite quickly overcame them and began to devise a plan to eliminate the Omega. He then transformed Greed into a blood raven and launched his spiraled shot at the beast, only to be surprised that it was still alive, even though he drained its life away. He wondered in disbelief what was happening. Suddenly, a masked figure appeared, and Vite charged towards him quickly, demanding to see his face. But the masked figure brandished his weapon at Vite, a lethal sin weapon as well. When Vite got closer to the masked figure, numerous Omega cut him off, where Vite discovered that the Omega was still alive due to its splitting ability. The essence of the Omega itself became capable of separating, allowing it to survive. Vite quickly dealt with the Omega and aimed his arrow at the masked figure, but the figure deflected his shot with a magical barrier. Vite charged at the masked figure, sword swinging fast. The masked figure just told him he was wasting his time. Vite was shocked because he'd been so sure the masked figure was Iris, but the masked figure shoved him back and started blasting him. Even though Vite had his protective armor on, the masked figure kept hitting him until he was bleeding. Then Vite tapped into the power of his greed skill, hitting the E realm level, and stepped up to face the masked figure. The masked figure jumped back quick and threw out a bunch of Omegas to block Vite, but Vite kept after him anyway. The masked figure fired at Vite but missed. Vite quickly knocked off the mask, revealing it was Northern. Stunned, Vite asked Northern in disbelief what he was trying to do, but Northern suddenly summoned the Holy Dragon, telling Vite the dragon had 30 seconds to reach Roxy. Vite was floored, while Northern told him he and the dragon were gonna do their best to kill Roxy. Vite bolted toward Roxy at lightning speed, while Mogan was yelling at the soldiers to run for their lives because the Holy Dragon was here. Roxy stood her ground in front of the Holy Dragon, which blasted a huge beam of light from its mouth, knocking everyone back. Just as Roxy was about to get hurt, Vite showed up and shielded her from the dragon's energy with his protective armor, also knocking off his mask. Roxy called out to him, "Vi." Then Vite turned to Roxy and told her to get out of here fast before the dragon attacked again, saying he'd buy her some time. He apologized for lying to her for so long, and before Roxy could say anything, Vite thanked her for everything and took off. He stood in front of the dragon, telling Greed he was counting on him. He summoned the power of the Great Cross and used it to hold the Holy Dragon in place with his cross power technique. Then Northern showed up, looking surprised at what Vite had done, calling it a clever trick. Vite pushed him back, saying now they could fight like men, and they started dueling, showing off their sword skills. Vite soon felt his strength fading, and Greed told him it was for 3 reasons. First, coming into the fight with power already activated. Second, having to use some of his strength to keep the technique going. And before Greed could explain the third, Northern knocked him away, saying he hadn't even started fighting seriously yet. Vite went on the offensive, but Northern told him his attack was too sloppy. Then Northern saw through Vite's plan and said he knew what he was up to. Vite looked tense, and Northern used that chance to get past him and slash his arm, sending Vite crashing down. Northern told him it was over, then came closer, saying he had to pay the price for all the trouble he'd caused because Iris had pinned her hopes on him. Before Northern could finish, he was shocked to see Vite stab him in the back with his sword. Northern asked in disbelief how Vite pulled off that illusion spell and when. Vite said he guessed Northern would let his guard down when he thought he'd won. Northern asked if that's why Vite sacrificed his arm. Vite replied that it was a gamble, all or nothing, and then he killed him. Vite's gluttony skill kicked in, and he teleported back to the same spot as before, where Haniel appeared again, introducing herself as Luna and thanking him for killing her. She apologized and said she couldn't keep helping him, showing him where she'd been holding back his gluttony skill. Vite remarked that she was the one responsible for that. She apologized again, saying she couldn't support him anymore, and warned him not to consume the Holy Dragon, or he'd lose control. Suddenly, the ground started collapsing, and Greed, in human form, grabbed his hand. He told Vite time was running out. Vite thanked Haniel for the warning, saying he still couldn't let the dragon run wild and he was going to kill it. Then Haniel's world collapsed, and Vite returned to reality, telling Greed he used to be human. Greed asked him to think of this as just a temporary form. The dragon broke free from its chains, and Vite asked Greed what the plan was to deal with it. Greed said using a one-handed shield would be tough. Vite then shoved Greed towards the dragon, flew at it with a destructive punch, grabbed his sword again, jumped at the dragon, and started hacking it to pieces. The dragon was sprawled out on the ground, and Vite finished it off with his sword, ending its life. Vite's gluttony skill kicked in, and he tried to control it before he turned into a monster. Right then, he decided to sacrifice his skills and go back to his starting stats to lessen the damage. Greed warned him that even if he did that, his skills would still consume him someday. Suddenly, Main showed up, saying she didn't think this day would come so soon. Vite begged her to kill him. She told him she'd warned him not to overdo it. He apologized, and then she raised her axe, saying she'd keep her promise. But just as Main lifted her axe and was about to bring it down on him, Roxy arrived, rolling Vite out of the way and creating a crack in the ground. Vite asked her why she did that and looked away, asking her not to look at him like that because he didn't want her to see him like this. Tearfully, she asked if he thought that was enough reason for her to hate him. Then she told him, seriously, that he'd still be Vite no matter how much power he had, and asked him not to kill himself. Meanwhile, Vite's gluttony skill calmed down, surprising him, while Roxy reached out her hand, asking him to come back to Babylon. Vite took her hand, amazed that she accepted him even after knowing the truth, and that she saved him even though he kept saying he would save her. At that moment, Main thought to herself that Vite had found someone to support him. After that, things happened, and Vite woke up in the inn, remembering Northern had cut off his left arm. He wondered how long he'd been out when suddenly the door opened and Iris and Main came in. Iris handed him Greed and said he'd forgotten it, and she had to go get it herself since Main apparently forgot to bring it. Main said she'd been busy dealing with envy Envy, while Iris went on, saying it would be bad if another vessel like Northern showed up and started causing trouble again. Veit asked her what was going on, and Iris explained that Envy had controlled Northern's gun. Veit then asked Greed if he knew about this. Greed said he had no idea, but wasn't surprised. Veit asked Main and Iris what they did with Envy. Main replied that they'd thrown him to the other side of Gallia. Iris then told Veit that they needed his help after he proved himself by killing the Holy Dragon, explaining that there was no longer a need to create a human crowned with Roxy's death. Veit asked her to promise she wouldn't hurt Roxy first, and he'd listen to her. Iris told him that Envy was the one who suggested Roxy's death, but she regretted agreeing with him. She told him that the country would enter a new era now that the Holy Dragon was dead, so all the bearers of the deadly sins had to handle what would happen next, and he had no right to refuse. Veit asked her what she meant. Iris said they first had to treat his arm and leave before Roxy arrived. Veit seriously asked if she could restore his arm. Meanwhile, Miria was training to fight with a sword against Morgan when she noticed Roxy leaving, and she quickly ran to her, asking if she was going out. Roxy confirmed it and told her to handle things until she got back. Soon, Roxy arrived at the inn carrying grapes, starting to look for Veit, but found a note he left for her, asking for forgiveness for disappearing so suddenly and promising he'd come back to her. Roxy cried and remembered when she first found him, scared and asking her not to hit him. She then apologized for scaring him and offered him candy, asking him to come home as soon as he ate it. He told her he had no home, no family, and then left, thanking her for her kindness. Meanwhile, Memel told Rafal that Veit was the corpse then, and Rafal confirmed that, going back to his research. Memel wondered about this research, while Veit got his arm back with Main and Iris's help, who told him they'd meet him in the capital.